lot of buzz about how meal frequency. So some say you should eat every 2 to 3 hours. Some say you should eat every 4 to 5 hours to maximize muscle protein synthesis. What is best for hypertrophy?
Okay, now I'm gonna go here and talk about it. This is really difficult. Okay, before I start, I'm gonna say, "Hey, Mom." Mom destroyed.
Mom,
what's up? Hey, Mom. I love you. So, but anyway, let's go into this. So let's talk about this. Meal frequency. You have to understand, when we talk about a lot of the meal frequency data, one of the major studies was done by a guy named Areta. And Areta came out basically and did a study where they took like protein and divided it into like really small tiny meals, moderate meals, or like really 2 large big meals. And basically what you end up seeing is that like if you spread it out to like more like the 4 to 6 meals, you got more overall protein synthesis than 2 large meals. But if you spread it out too thin, it wasn't as good. That's version 1 of what I'm going to say, okay? So, and based on this acute study, you would say that it's better to have like 4 to 5 meals, maybe 6, right? Okay. What I want to point out is, now, my brother, Dr. Gabe Wilson, also did research. He found that when you had 3 meals, if you had branched chain amino acids in between those meals, that you would keep protein synthesis going, essentially, which was really, really an interesting topic. What was actually weird is that, like, if you had protein meal and in between meals like a carb, you would actually stimulate protein synthesis in between those meals. So this acute data is leading us to believe that, oh, high meal frequency is great for overall hypertrophy. Here's the issue. You got to think long term, right? We don't have a lot of high meal frequency studies looking at long-term hypertrophy. You cannot always assume that what is short-term will lead to the long-term, right? So there's a process called autophagy. And what that means is basically it's cleaning the cell out. So you have your cell, you have proteins that get damaged, and you need to repair those, you need to get rid of those. You have mitochondria that needs to be replaced. That happens with autophagy. If you're turning on like mTOR every 3 to 4 hours all the time, mTOR, what turns on protein synthesis, shuts off this cleaning process. So in the short term, it's going to be better for growth. But I would suspect that long term, it's not ideal. So what I would say is that you start off with high meal frequency, say like a month. You grow with that. You'll start to notice you're likely going to plateau at some point. Back off on meal frequency. Maybe try intermittent fasting to lean up. Improve your body composition. Improve insulin sensitivity. Let that autophagy occur. Clean out those negative proteins, and then after another month, re-up the meal frequency. This is called frequency of, basically you're cycling your frequency. You're periodizing it, and I would predict that that's going to lead to greater hypertrophy. So my answer is high meal frequency is going to be good, like 4 or 6 meals a day, but you're likely going to plateau with that. If you want to optimize health and hypertrophy, go to lower meal frequency for a little time point to reset the system, then go back to high meal frequency. Great question.
So there's a lot of buzz about intermittent fasting and metabolic adaptations. So do you think intermittent fasting causes negative metabolic adaptations, slower metabolism?
Excellent question. A lot of the studies on intermittent fasting and metabolism, and especially when you're looking at like thyroid hormone, which regulates metabolism, and even testosterone, which tends to be when it lowers, like for example, if a bodybuilder diets for a show, what we like to think is that their testosterone goes down, their T3 goes down, or thyroid hormone. But lots of studies in Ramadan have been done where if you're not in a calorie deficit or only slight calorie deficit, that's not the case. In fact, oftentimes thyroid hormone goes up, like T3 goes up, I've seen in Ramadan studies, and sometimes testosterone goes up, which is very intriguing to me. What's going to cause your metabolism to go down with intermittent fasting is simple, a calorie deficit. that's going to cause metabolism to adapt. But there is some evidence that, like, if you're dieting with intermittent fasting, and things like ketones raise up, which could spare muscle mass, and therefore possibly you may not actually sustain metabolism. So the other thing about intermittent fasting is that it's intermittent, and typically you're cycling those calories. And research from Devuti suggests that that might help sustain your metabolism. Great question.
So this next question has 2 parts. How soon can I consume alcohol after I work out on a carb-adapted diet and a keto-adapted diet?
This is a difficult question. It always depends on your goal, okay? So, alcohol does suppress protein synthesis, right? So if I were to say we were celebrating something at ASPI, we always have a lot of cool things to celebrate and talk about here, and I was going to have a few drinks at night, right? I like wine. I'm from California, all right. So you know how it is. Or I'm going to I'm going to go ahead and vibe in some wine, right? Andy's getting me into more
European old world wines.
European old world wines. I'm from California, so but anyway, if I'm going to do that, I'm going to be quite honest with you. I would separate my training session. I train in the morning, and I would have the alcohol at night. Now, if I'm well trained, protein synthesis might only last like 6 hours anyway, right? If I'm untrained, protein synthesis is probably going to last 48 to 72 hours. So, alcohol anytime that day, plan that as your off day if you're untrained. If you're well trained and train in the morning hard, if you had some alcohol at night, it's likely not going to interfere drastically with muscle growth. Certainly not going to help it. But I don't know that there's a difference between whether you're keto adapted or carb adapted in that standpoint. I like that question. It was like on the fly. Yeah, boom.
So next question. If training a body part every day, are you going to not recover from that?
Excellent question. Training a body part every day, you're not going to recover. There's actually opposite evidence to the opposite. Now, there's not a ton of evidence. Remember, here's the thing. There's only been one study that's had people like train every body part every day. And basically they call it the Norwegian frequency study. I know Juma Iraqi's watching this, and I just met with him in Norway. But the bottom line is, the problem is that study's been published in abstract form. Obviously, we need a lot more data with this. But basically what they did is they took powerlifters, they trained 3 times a week, bench, squat, deadlift. They took their training volume, divided that volume into 6 days a week. So say I was doing 10 sets of squats Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Now I do 5 on Monday, 5 on Tuesday, 5 on Wednesday, 5 on Thursday, 5 on Friday, etc., etc. They actually got more gains on hypertrophy, more gains in strength, more muscle mass, everything. Okay? But remember, however, they distributed their volume. Okay? So they took their volume, the same volume they're doing, same number of sets, and just divided it up among the week. But you got to think about it from this perspective. If they did 10 sets Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then said I'm going to do 10 sets Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, they likely would start to overreach and overtrain. So it's all dependent on volume. And there's research on that. For example, Andy Fry in 1994 did a study where basically they did maximal. I have no idea how I memorize this stuff, but they did maximal resistance training every single day for like 2 weeks, and some guys did not recover after 6 weeks. Okay, so if you're going to have high frequency, you better periodize the intensity of that frequency and distribute your volume correctly. Cool.
Next question: When in ketosis, does your body burn excess fats first, or will it break into muscle or protein?
So, when in ketosis, does your body
break into excess fat
first or muscle? If you are keto adapted, the answer is fat first. And the reason why, fat is going to be first is because ketosis is really meant for a state of starvation. So if I'm starving back in the 50s, 60s, 30s, they predicted that, like, if I was in starvation, I should die relatively fast. And even, and then I think that's important to understand. Why? Because glucose is so important for the brain. Well, they thought to get glucose, you'd have to, once you ran out of glycogen, which is only 2,000 calories, you'd have to break into skeletal muscle tissue, right? And so that was the problem. So they thought, if you're going to have to create glucose from muscle, you're going to waste away and die in like 2 weeks or so. There's been studies with morbidly obese people who have lived a year fasting. Now, a lot of you guys are lean out there, so I'm not going to say like you're going to be, Andy's pretty shredded. Probably not going to last a year fasting, okay? But so Trey, definitely not. So anyhow, my point is that you're going to preferentially use fat first because you're going to spare muscle, and data supports that.
You got one on 30 you want to answer?
Sure. Megan asked, hey Megan, how do you add muscle while burning fat? Great question. Megan, that all depends on how well trained you are, first of all. If someone's like untrained and they have a lot of body fat, then all you gotta do is lift weights and do some cardio probably. If you lifted weights and had a 500 calorie deficit and did cardio, you would gain muscle. It's because your body's not going to tap into fat. If you are more like, it's hard to put on muscle, like Andy and I, even if like we're like squatting 405 or whatever for 5 sets of 5. And you're not putting on a lot of size. If you're dieting, it's hard. The answer to that, if you're more of a hard gainer, the answer is that you're gonna have to distribute your volume out more carefully and likely have higher training frequency. Because your intensity in the gym might not be able to be as high in a calorie deficit. So you might need to train like 6 days a week. And sometimes you may need to even do like 2 a days. But the volume per training session is not going to be as high. So now you're getting more frequent stimulation of things like protein synthesis, which is going to force your body to adapt. On top of that, you're going to need to optimize like your protein intake. Make sure you're getting probably like a gram per pound. Actually, if one method, I think ketogenic dieting is a good method because that'll spare muscle while you're training. If you're not keto dieting, Dr. Joey Antonio's research has shown that very high protein diets could spare muscle, and also like leucine metabolites like HMB are going to help you gain muscle and lose fat at the same time. So that would be my answer to that. Okay.
Do you want another one? We got a good one. Keto
Let's
and fasting.
Okay, keto.
Keto and fasting.
Keto and fasting. So keto and fasting is a really good question. So basically, I think they go hand in hand. I really do think they go hand in hand. 1, fasting speeds keto adaptation. 2, you don't need to eat as frequently when you're ketogenic dieting. And so the bottom line is that when you're fasting and you're doing ketogenic dieting, you can spare muscle more easily when you're keto. Even if your blood glucose goes low, your ketones are high, and those spare muscle. So I think that's one of the things that you have to think about when you're really getting into keto and fasting. Whereas normal dieting and fasting is a lot harder. Steve Green asks, hey doc, any advice for us older folks with joint pains, knees mainly? So my dad was a firefighter for a long time, and I mean, he saved a lot of lives, but my dad was one of those guys who was going to be the first guy to run through the burning building. And that's what he taught me. He's the first guy, but being on the force, he got a lot of injuries, particularly like in his knees. You got to think you might go in and you have to be in a fire and carry out a guy, who's 350 pounds. That's going to take its toll on your knees and your joints. So one thing that we instituted with my dad actually is blood flow restriction training. So what that allows you to do is, basically you're taking a rat or a ace bandage or a knee wrap, you're wrapping it around the top of your thigh. It is your thigh, it's the top of your thigh, right? And basically, you're lifting weights at basically a schema of 30 reps and 3 sets of 15 with 30 seconds rest in between, and you're only lifting with like 40% of your 1RM. Now, our research that we published has actually shown that that could be beneficial for healing joints, and it releases a lot of growth factors that might speed recovery of joints. But also remember, you might not need to lift as heavy as often with blood flow restriction. So Steve, that's my thought. What else we got?
Targeted keto, is it good for someone that may not be able to fully keto adapt?
Targeted keto, if you're keto adapting, I would stay away from targeted keto. If you've been keto for like 3 months, I think having a few carbs before your workout's fine. I don't think it's going to help with muscle glycogen, because when you're keto adapted, you're going to have muscle glycogen stores anyway, right? But I think for the cognitive effects, we know that if I were to drink carbs right now, rinse them and spit them out, it would actually improve my performance. There's a lot of research from Dr. Eukendrup on that and others. So someone asked, and I missed the name, but someone asked, is a detox necessary? Probably not. I think that your body kind of detoxes you all the time anyway. I think eating healthy is something that you should consider doing, and that depends on what metabolic state you're in, but eating healthy is something that you should focus on all the time.
Do you have a question up there you want to answer? We got one more good one.
Megan asked a good question. She says, with keto diets, do you count your vegetables as carbs? Are there certain vegetables that work better with a diet? Well, we actually just bought a bunch of cauliflower rice, right? And it was interesting because like Matt Stephans talked about taking the cauliflower rice and making mac and cheese with it. Like I think if you shred it, the cauliflower,
we're gonna do it.
I think we should do it. So, but anyway, good question, Megan. The answer is that there's 2 grams of fiber and 2 grams of other carbs. There's 4 carbs, 2 of them are fiber. I would count on your MyFitnessPal the 2 grams of carbs and not the fiber. Okay, so I would count net carbs, Megan, because we found actually, like we did research with soluble corn fiber, which is in protein bars, and basically we found no blood glucose response, no insulin response, high fermentation, which means that you're actually producing short chain fatty acids. So in actuality, 50% of that broccoli or vegetable might be ketogenic. So that's my answer to that. HICA versus HMB, Vincent, we don't know. I suspect they're similar.